There were mornings when I would wake up and I would think, okay, I'm gonna wake up a second time. This is just a nightmare. And it wasn't.
This is one of the most well thought out, well executed plans.
Diabolical.
Absolutely.
I hope that Miss Sharon Anschutz's family can find peace in knowing that her killer was identified and no longer in a position to harm others.
After being at sea for months, Stephen Ladwig was looking forward to getting some much-needed rest and relaxation at home with his wife when Stephen went back to his apartment, December 2, 1994. He found his wife's dead body on their bed. It would be another 29 years before Terrie's family could finally get justice. Terrie Ladwig was born on April 13, 1966, in the Philippines. His name at the time was Larry Earl Thompson, Jr. Nobody knows when exactly, but her family moved to Kansas while Terrie was still a kid. She went to the East Bay area in Concord, California, and started working at a convenience store as a cashier. Stephen Ladwig, who would become her husband, was the man she met in Concord. Stephen was a junior officer in the Navy, and he and Terrie became fast friends. He knew from the beginning that she was a transgender woman and agreed with her choice to have treatment to change her gender. Stephen later said in an interview that he always thought of Terrie as a woman. He said that they were both alone and most of the time they enjoyed each other's company. In the summer of 1994, they got married in Reno. Stephen left for a tour of duty on the USS Parch submarine in June 1994. When Stephen got back to the military base in Bangor, Washington on November 28, 1994, he got a frantic call from Terrie. Stephen said that Terrie told him that someone was trying to break into their flat. The attack didn't work, and the would-be attacker left soon after. Stephen, on the other hand, didn't want to take any chances, so he chose to take some time off to spend with Terrie. Soon, he went back to their apartment on Adelaide Street in Concord, where he hoped to spend some valuable time with them. Instead, Stephen let a nightmare inside. There seemed to have been a fight in the room. Stephen was worried about Terrie, so he went to the bedroom to look for her and found her sitting on the bed. A piece of white electrical cord had been used to kill her. Stephen told the cops about what happened. When the detectives got to the apartment, they looked for signs and asked neighbors if they had seen anything strange. Investigators found that the apartment had not been broken into, so they thought that Terrie knew who killed her. They also found a lot of furniture that had been turned over, which showed that there had been a fight. Nothing had been taken, so it didn't look like a robbery. Before bringing Terrie's body to the coroner's office for an autopsy, investigators took a number of pieces of forensic evidence from the scene of the crime. There, it was clear that Terrie had been killed by being choked. Stephen was questioned by the police, and he said that he had been away on a tour of service. He also told police that someone tried to break into his house on November 28, 1994, but no report had been made about this. Whoever was trying to get in gave up. Stephen was eventually let go after his alibi was proven to be true. He was no longer a suspect in the murder. After a week, Terrie's silver Buick Regal was found a mile from her house. Before it was given back to Stephen, it was dusted for prints and looked through for clues. After Terrie was killed, the news stories were more about her marriage to Stephen than about the sadness of her death. After a disciplinary review, a month after the murder, Stephen was kicked out of the Navy with less than a good record. In California, in 1994, same-sex marriages were not allowed because of the probe into his and Terrie's marriage. The case went cold over time, but officers still checked on it from time to time. In the middle of 2022, the case was looked into again, and this time the FBI was brought in to help. Police were able to link a single suspect after another round of evidence led to a match, and a review of witness accounts led to a name. It took them to the home of James William Grimsley, who is 55 years old and lives in Salt Lake City. So far, investigators haven't said much about his past or where he's been arrested. Grimsley is from Oregon, but because of his job as a truck driver, he went to Utah. Grimsley was found and caught on January 26, 2023, at his home in Salt Lake City. This was done by Concord Police, Salt Lake City Police, and the FBI. He was later sent back to Contra Costa County, where he was charged with murder and booked into the Salt Lake County Jail on a $1 million fugitive order. Investigators haven't said what forensic evidence tied him to the crime yet, but they say that his background in trucking may have brought him to the Contra Costa County area in 1919. Police say that Grimsley was about 26 years old when the murder happened. Lieutenant Sean Donnelly stated that they were confident that he was the person who had committed the murder. Terry's friend, Brittany Shores, who is also a transgender woman, expressed that she had never thought that the crime would be solved, and that Terrie was a wonderful person who made people laugh and talked about transgender issues and laws. Reports suggested that it may have been a hate crime, but investigators had not provided more information because the investigation was still ongoing. Donnelly and his team had notified Terrie's family and husband, Stephen, about the arrest, but they had not yet released any statements. Donnelly expressed his hope that there would be justice for Terrie after all these years, as she was young and had her whole life ahead of her. Sarah Roberts, age 57, and her daughter Sharon, age 26, stunned the neighbors at the Grant Houses complex on West 125th Street in Harlem, New York. Sarah Roberts lived in the complex with her daughter, Shy. The fact that the murderer resided among them in the Harlem area was a secret to everyone there. Sarah and her daughter were the only occupants of their apartment in Harlem, which was located on the 6th floor. It was reported that the mother and daughter did not rely on the assistance of any members of their own family, but rather on caregivers. Sarah was diagnosed with a severe case of emphysema, and her daughter Sharon was diagnosed with a developmental handicap. Both were unable to work due to their illnesses. Both of the patients were dependent on the assistance provided by their caregiver, Celeste Cornelius. On the morning of February 20, 1994, Celeste was the one who came across their bodies and discovered them. According to the caregiver, she had been attempting to phone Sarah in an effort to determine whether or not they required anything before Sarah's arrival at work. After her phone calls went unreturned, she came to the conclusion that she should visit the women in person to see how they were doing. She discovered that the door had been left unlocked and proceeded to enter the flat, which was eerily silent. As she entered Sarah's bedroom, she was shocked to find the mother's lifeless body lying in the bed. After that, she hastened to Sharon's bedroom, where she found the deceased woman lying on the ground. Soon as the police got to the residence, they immediately launched an inquiry into the slayings of the two women. Since there was no sign of a break-in at the apartment, the police are led to believe that Sarah may have been familiar with her murderer and may have let them into the apartment. They made the shocking discovery that both of the women had been killed by being strangled. Sharon still had the woolen shawl and the oxygen tank tube that was used to suffocate her around her neck when she was strangled. It appeared as though the perpetrator knew just where to hunt for valuables, because only a portion of the apartment had been searched. The police decided to question the neighbors because the event seemed to be suspicious. They found out via their interviews that the apartment complex had been a hotbed for criminal activity in the past. In the most recent past, there has been a number of burglaries as well as 2 homicides. Additionally, it was discovered by the police that Sarah and Sharon had been the victims of a burglary just before Christmas the previous year. The burglar made off with a video cassette recorder, in addition to a few $100. The police have come to the conclusion that whomever robbed them back in December may, or may not also have been responsible for their deaths. They gathered forensic evidence, such as cigarette butts from the apartment and a dry secretion swab from Sharon's hands. The evidence included both of these items. Because Sarah had emphysema, no one in the apartment would have smoked around her normally, so the cigarette butts that were found led the police to believe that the perpetrator may have been the person who killed her. During the autopsy, it was determined that both of the women had died from a suffocation-related cause, and they scraped the nails of both of the victims in the hopes of discovering some kind of biological material in the clippings. In spite of the many submissions of evidence, the CEODI's database has not produced a single match to anyone. The evidence had become less reliable over the years, but developments in technology made it possible to construct a profile based on an extremely minute amount of trace DNA. When the case was reopened in 2022, the investigators analyzed the DNA evidence that had been obtained for the new profile, and they eventually found a match in the person of Larry Atkinson, who was 64 years old. Atkinson had a long history of criminal behavior and was arrested a total of 28 times in the past. Since 1985, he had a checkered criminal history that included drug-related events, assaults, and an attempted robbery, and he had been in and out of prison numerous times. After being convicted of selling drugs and completing a sentence of 2 years for the offense, he was granted parole in 2013. The sample of his DNA that was taken and entered into the national database was obtained during his most recent arrest. Atkinson was taken into custody on Monday, January 23, 2023, and his residence in Harlem, which was located 13 blocks away from the scene of the killings, was the location of the arrest. He had been living there with his companion, Celeste Cornelius, who was Sarah and Sharon Roberts' principal career for the last 25 years of their life. Celeste Cornelius was 65 years old at the time of their deaths. The investigation revealed that both Atkinson and Cornelius were questioned by police after the deaths of their co-workers. They had not been disqualified, nor had one of them been classified as a suspect at that point, due to the fact that Atkinson had recently been diagnosed with cancer following his arrest. He needed to be transported in a wheelchair while wearing an oxygen mask. After receiving medical attention at a nearby facility, Atkinson was turned over to the custody of law enforcement. Celeste, Atkinson's partner, maintains that Atkinson was not responsible for the killings of Sarah and Sharon. She expressed that she had no doubt that he did not do it and did not want to be misquoted. She stated that she had no interest in the DNA or any other confusing details and affirmed that he was innocent of the charge. Juliet Wilson, their neighbor, was quoted as saying that the couple had been living together in the apartment for the past 20 years, and that she thought they were both really nice people. She said that they never argued about anything, which was a testament to his kind nature. Wilson also expressed surprise about the entire situation. According to the article, Atkinson was charged with the murders of both women by a judge from the Manhattan Supreme Court on Thursday, January 27, 2023, and he remains in police custody under close medical supervision. The police have not identified a clear motive for the crime, nor how Atkinson gained entry into the apartment, and the investigation is still ongoing. Atkinson is currently being held in police custody while being closely monitored by medical professionals. There would be no release on bond. The police are still not sure what Atkinson's motivation was for committing the crime, nor do they know how he managed to get inside the residence. Mary Mathis Davis was born on February 12, 1958, in the picturesque town of Lexington, North Carolina, in the United States of America. There is not much known about her childhood, other than the fact that she had a sister by the name of Lisa Hinkle, who was someone she valued deeply and with whom she had many cherished memories. Mary possessed a special skill that allowed her to put others at ease whenever they were in her company. Let's fast forward to the year 1987. Mary, who was 29 years old at the time, had found happiness and was settling down with her husband, Richard Davis. They were able to have 2 lovely children as a couple, one of each gender, a boy and a girl. The youngest in the group had just turned 1 year old at the time. Mary was juggling a lot of tasks at once. She was responsible for her family, but she also needed to provide for her husband and put food on the table. She had a lot of responsibilities. As a consequence of this fact, she began working at Lanyard's Ace Hardware, which is situated in Lexington. Mary's family was doing well in spite of the challenges they faced on a daily basis. Mary's children did not need anything, and she took great pride in the fact that she was able to care for their needs. But just as it seemed like everything was going according to plan, a terrible accident occurred. 30th of May, 1987. Was one of those days that at the Ace Hardware store in Lexington Lanyard was meant to be just like any other. Nobody had any idea that it would turn out to be anything but what they expected. Mary arrived at the shop that morning with her usual cheery smile and infectious amount of enthusiasm, eager to take on the challenges that the day would bring. She wasted no time in getting to work. After finishing her responsibilities for the morning, Mary made the decision to give herself a break and went out to eat lunch. However, when she didn't return in the allotted amount of time, her coworkers started to become concerned. As customers and employees looked for any indication of her whereabouts, the store descended into a state of confusion. Had she gotten turned around? What dreadful thing could have happened to her? The initial state of perplexity they were in quickly morphed into anxiety, then worry, and eventually utter panic as the minutes ticked by. They did not squander a single additional second and immediately rushed for the phone to ring 911 and report Mary as missing. They were aware that they could not leave Mary's family in the dark about what had transpired, so they placed a second call to inform them of what had taken place. As soon as the police received the word that Mary had gone missing, they immediately went into action and began searching high and low for any evidence of the woman who had vanished. The search, however, came up empty. Nothing was found. The mystery surrounding Mary's absence became more perplexing as the hours passed, and the number of questions that needed answers kept growing. They were left with an agonizing aching in their hearts, and they hoped and prayed that she would be found safe and sound. Mary's family had been left without her. Everyone in the town will never forget the 30th of May, 1987, which was the day after Mary went missing. It was a day that will forever be imprinted in their memories. An emergency phone call was received at the local police station just as the sun started to rise. A dead body was reportedly discovered behind the Winn-Dixie store. As the caller stated, officers were racing to the location, each of them feeling a mixture of excitement and horror as their hearts raced. It appeared as though Mary's lifeless body was waiting there for them to discover it. The search had been called off, but the secret behind what had become of her was only just starting to be revealed. The cops were unable to obtain any information, no matter how many times they questioned the workers at the grocery. They were dismayed, but resolved to find answers. So they took Mary's body to get an autopsy in the hopes that it would provide some insight into the circumstances surrounding her untimely passing. The shocking news that Mary had passed away came as a freight train to her family. They were going to remember that day for the rest of their lives. One family couldn't believe what they were hearing, and the news broke their hearts into a million pieces. They were left with nothing but sorrow and questions after it was all over. The results of Mary's autopsy were ultimately delivered several days after her body was discovered. It was impossible for anyone to have ever conceived of the horrible circumstances of Mary's murder, which included the fact that she had been sexually raped and then murdered. The news caused shockwaves to spread throughout the neighborhood, and the authorities immediately realized they were dealing with a murderer. The investigators who were working on Mary's case had no intention of letting this murderer get away from them unpunished. They meticulously examined each and every piece of evidence that had been gathered from the scene of the crime. Inconveniently, the technology that was accessible at the time was restricted, and as a result, they ran into a dead end in their investigation. In spite of this, the police did not give up the search. They did not stop working, even in the middle of the night, and followed up on every clue and tip that came their way. They canvassed the area and interrogated potential witnesses. The pace of the investigation, on the other hand, started to slow down as the days became weeks and the weeks turned into months as time passed. The lack of new information eventually caused the investigation to be abandoned. After having been under investigation for a number of years, the killing of Mary was given a new beginning in 2022 when a different group of detectives took over the case. They sent the physical evidence in for analysis at the North Carolina State Crime Lab, where they were informed that it might be helpful. Othram, a private laboratory in Texas that specialized in forensic genealogy, was recruited by the State Bureau of Investigation when it was pulled into the investigation. After that, DNA evidence from the case was delivered to Othram, whose team of scientists labored feverishly day and night to establish a genealogical profile of an unidentified male suspect in the case. The crew labored diligently over every aspect of the investigation for a number of months before they were ultimately able to put together the name of the elusive criminal. Russell Grant Wood was identified as the person who should be considered suspicious. After all of these years, the investigation was ultimately wrapped up with the discovery of this information. Unfortunately, it was found out that Wood had passed away in 2013 when he was 58 years old, so there is no chance of justice being served. If he had been found alive, he would have been charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping in the first degree, and rape in the first degree. On February 3, 2023, the dedicated detectives who had been working relentlessly on the case were informed of the breakthrough, and Mary's family expressed their gratitude to them for their efforts in solving the case. Jamin Robinson, who was 22 years old when he died in a hit-and-run accident, continued to haunt his family, friends, and the authorities looking into the case for the past 13 years. The case was eventually turned on its head, which resulted in the arrest of an unlikely suspect. However, it wasn't until a witness finally came forward and told the truth to the police that the case was eventually turned on its head. He was brought up together with his sister, Chastity Jackson, with whom he shared a tight bond that was devoted to church and family. He was born in the same year. Jamin had always put in a lot of effort to realize his aspirations and attain the things he wanted. He had a lot of friends and was always prepared to lend a hand to anyone who was struggling. In addition to that, he was an accomplished artist who took great pleasure in putting his feelings and ideas onto canvas. But one unfortunate evening put an end to all of these hopes and dreams. On July 23, 2010, when police and emergency medical personnel arrived at the scene, they were perplexed by the scene that greeted them. The fact that there was no blood at the scene or visible wounds on the young man's body, despite the fact that he was laying in the ditch, indicated that he had suffered serious injuries. The emergency medical technicians worked quickly to restore his composure before rushing him to the Lally Kemp Regional Medical Center. After he was taken to the hospital, The doctors determined that he had multiple head injuries. Immediately after the accident, he was sent to the St. Tammany Medical Center to undergo surgery. In the meantime, investigators contacted Jamin's family to brief them on the situation and inform them about the event. During the time that the chairman's family was rushing to be by his side, doctors were performing an emergency operation. However, despite the fact that the doctors were successful in stopping the excessive internal bleeding, Jamin's condition remained critical. He was taken to the New Orleans University Hospital to continue his recovery, but his family was given the truth about his deteriorating condition and warned to prepare themselves for the worst-case scenario. On July 25, 2010, Jamin passed away as a result of his injuries. He was surrounded by his family at the time of his passing. After learning of his unexpected passing, the medical examiner made arrangements for an autopsy to take place the next day, on Monday, July 26, 2010. The medical examiner came to the conclusion that the chairman had died as a result of internal head injuries that were closed, which he considered was compatible with being struck by a vehicle driving at a modest speed. Following the findings of the medical examiner, investigators opened a homicide investigation and started questioning witnesses about a possible hit-and-run accident that occurred in the area. At the same time that the chairman's family was saying their final goodbyes to him in the Holy Garden Cemetery, investigators were not about to give up so simply, because it was a relatively small town. The investigators anticipated that residents would volunteer information. However, it turned out to be a difficult fight to complete the investigation. Montre Page, who is 17 years old and is a close friend of Chairman, was the first person the police questioned after receiving the news that Jamin had been found in the ditch. Because he was the first person to arrive at the scene, Montre was initially considered a person of interest in the investigation. After he had some time to recover from the shock, the police believed that he would be able to provide more clarity about the events that occurred earlier that night. He informed the authorities that he had been walking back to his own house when he saw someone laying in the ditch on Kemp Street. Montre did not pay attention to any of the cars that were in the immediate area of the accident. They decided to ask the general public for information instead. On the evening of July 23, 2010, no one was able to provide any hints or explanations as to what had taken place. The investigators then went to the media to keep the story alive by publishing it in local newspapers and updating their social media sites. They did this in the hope that the narrative would ultimately jog someone's memory and lead them to the person responsible for the crime. Edwards, on the other hand, maintained his conviction that someone in the neighborhood was aware of what had taken place. "I'm still holding out hope that the coverage in the media would prompt someone to act honorably and find a way to bring resolution to the Robinson family members. All it takes is one call," was what he had to say. Even that was eventually fruitless, and the authorities were forced to start from the beginning. The investigation was closed, but Jamin's family's suffering persisted deep within their hearts and minds long after the case had been resolved. After 7 years of traveling in circles with the case, the Crime Stoppers branch of the Sheriff's Department assisted with the investigation by establishing a tip line and urging the general public to call in and provide any possible leads in an anonymous manner. Jody Powell, the director of Crime Stoppers, stated that the passing of Jamin was a tragedy, and the organization's primary goal was to provide the family with some justice. As there were no fresh developments in the investigation, the case was passed on to Mike Strickland, a detective who specializes in cold cases. Strickland had a reputation for finding clues in places where most people thought it was impossible to do so. In the year 2019, Strickland launched the inquiry and began painstakingly piecing together the sequence of events that led to Jamin's passing. He talked to a second coroner, who reviewed the reports and concurred that the injuries received by Jamin were consistent with the trauma inflicted by a slow-moving car. This coroner was consulted by the investigator. It is interesting to note, however, that it was observed that it was also feasible for someone to have hit Shamin in the back of the head during the altercation, which might have produced injuries that were comparable to those that he sustained. Working with this second plausible explanation, Strickland's strategy was slow but determined, and it paid off ultimately when a witness came forward in January 2023 with new information regarding the Jamin Robinson case. The investigators believed that the witness had finally come forward after living with the burden of shame, knowing who was guilty of taking the life of the young guy, and wanted to pursue justice for everyone involved in the situation. The persistent attention shown by the media in determining who was responsible for Jamin's killing also had a role in propelling this further. The full details of what the unnamed witness claimed to have heard about the investigation have not been made public by the investigators. However, the witness stated to the investigators that the hit-and-run theory was merely a cover-up, and that Jamin's close friend Montre Page was in fact the one who was responsible for Jamin's passing. The realization that the suspect in their case had been lying to them the whole time was a shocking one for the detectives who were investigating the case. At the age of 30, Montre was no longer difficult to locate. In the years that had passed after Jamin's passing, Montre had become deeply involved in the criminal underworld. The Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff's Office tracked down Montre on February 10, 2023, in Chambers County, Texas, where he had been working as a construction laborer since the previous year. He was taken into custody for failing to appear in court in connection with a felony case, charged with the murder of Jamin Robinson in the second degree, and extradited to the state of Louisiana. On November 16, 2021, Montre was taken into custody and charged with other drug-related offenses before he was arrested for the murder of Jamin the Fafabin the Wild Way. His sentencing has been postponed until November 19, 2021. And he is required to wear an ankle bracelet and remain under house arrest until then. Montre, on the other hand, was successful in removing the bracelet and making his escape to Texas. On February 27, 2023, he was given a sentence of 90 years in prison for charges that included possession and distribution of illegal substances, possession and illegal use of controlled dangerous substances, and possession of firearms or carrying concealed weapons by a convicted felon. The long arm of the law eventually caught up with him, and he was sentenced to this punishment. The charges included possession and distribution of illegal substances. Montre is currently being held in jail pending trial for the murder of Chairman Robinson in the second degree. The testimony of eyewitnesses and the fresh material that has been unearthed recently led to the official designation of him as a suspect in the investigation. After an appointment at a hair salon in Tigard, Oregon on November 29, 1988, a woman named Deborah, who was 30 years old at the time, did not come back to pick up her daughter, who was only 8 months old. After Deborah had finished her work for the day, her estranged husband, Robert L., picked up their daughter from the babysitter and kept her until Deborah had completed all of the responsibilities for the day. Robert became concerned when she did not appear at his house by 8 o'clock that evening. He began calling his friends and relatives to see if they had seen her or knew where she might be. The pair had been living apart since June of 1988, but remained married throughout this time. While Deborah and their adopted daughter were living in an apartment in Salem, Robert continued to live in the family home in Sherwood. Deborah had moved out of the family home. Robert placed a call to the authorities to report that his wife had gone missing. He explained that despite the fact that they had many disagreements, Deborah was not the kind of person who would arbitrarily give up custody of their daughter. The investigation into Deborah's disappearance was formally opened the following morning. Investigators were unable to find Deborah, despite conducting a comprehensive search of the locations that were known to be frequented by her. On December 1, 1988, Beaverton police were dispatched to a location between Southwest Murray Road and Southwest Shoals Ferry Road in response to a call about a strange car that had been parked there. It was a 1988 black Honda Accord, which Robert had stated to the police was the vehicle Deborah had purchased after they had divorced. The window on the driver's side had been rolled down, the car's license plates had been stolen, and the keys were on the front seat. When officers from the Washington County Sheriff's Office arrived, the trunk was opened and the lifeless body of Deborah Atrops was found inside. Immediately after arriving at the scene, the investigators had a sneaking suspicion that foul play was involved and began searching for clues. They were under the impression that Deborah had been killed, her body stuffed into the trunk of the automobile, and then the vehicle had been driven away and left abandoned by the side of the road. In the interim, they broke the news of the discovery to Deborah's divorced husband and the rest of her family. The death of the young mother left them in a condition of complete devastation. After doing an autopsy, the medical examiners came to the conclusion that Deborah had been physically abused prior to her death, and then she had been strangled. Investigators spent a significant amount of time working on the case and attempting to piece together Deborah's life. They had talked to members of her family, as well as her husband, Robert, who remained a person of interest despite the fact that the investigators had already questioned him. They were aware that in many situations, the spouse is the most likely suspect. However, it was unanimously agreed upon that despite their physical distance from one another, their relationship remained strong. An investigation into the matter further revealed that Robert stood to gain nothing from Deborah's passing. They also investigated whether or not Deborah could have a new romantic interest, but family members debunked that theory as well. They concluded that Deborah was not seeing anybody new. Investigators put a lot of time and effort into the investigation in the hopes of finding a solution to the murder of the young mother, but none of the leads produced any results. At some point in the future, Deborah's case would become one of the numerous unsolved cold cases that are currently waiting to be closed. Following the awarding of a grant to investigate violent cold cases by the United States Department of Justice in May 2021, the Washington County Sheriff's Department decided to reopen the investigation into the murder. This time around, the investigators were equipped with cutting-edge technology as well as improved ways of analyzing DNA samples. In contrast to the situation in 1988, when DNA testing was still in its infancy, investigators re-examined the evidence that had been seized from the crime scene. This included the coat that Deborah had been wearing as well as the car keys. In July 2022, these things were subjected to testing, and from the biological materials that were discovered on both pieces of evidence, the DNA of an unidentified male was developed. Due to the familial connection that exists between Robert Atrop and Deborah, sheriff's deputies made a request for a search warrant in October 2022 in order to obtain his fingerprints and DNA sample. After re-interviewing a number of witnesses and obtaining the findings of the DNA tests and fingerprint comparisons that matched with Robert, the prosecution brought the evidence before a grand jury at the courthouse. Robert Atrop, who is now 68 years old and estranged from his wife, Deborah Atrop, was indicted by a grand jury on Tuesday, February 28, 2023, for the second-degree murder of Deborah Atrop, which occurred 35 years earlier. On Thursday, March 2, 2023, Robert was taken into custody at his house in the city of Newberg, Oregon. After Robert's arrest, the district attorney for Washington County, Kevin Barton, expressed his pride in the work done by the cold case team to guarantee that victims of cases are not forgotten despite the passage of time. He is currently being held in custody at the Washington County Jail pending the outcome of his trial. Barton gave an interview to the press about unsolved crimes. We may think of these situations as being old, or we may use the phrase cold. But if you go to the family and friends of the victims of these cases, you'll find that these incidents are very present concerns for them. The trauma that was caused by that crime is still affecting them to this day.
There were mornings when I would wake up and I would think, okay, I'm gonna wake up a second time. This is just a nightmare. And it wasn't.
This is one of the most well thought out, well executed plans.
Diabolical.
Absolutely.
In June 2016, a 29-year-old woman named Michelle Hadley was on her way home after meeting a friend. But when she got home, she was surprised to find a group of police officers waiting for her in front of her house.
I get a phone call from my youngest daughter saying, hey, somebody's beating on the door. And I said, look outside. Is there police cars? She says, yeah, there's two of them. I said, well, then open.
Michelle stated that her younger daughter called her on the phone and informed her that someone had beaten her at the door. She told her daughter to look outside and see if there was a police car and instructed her to open the door. She was arrested because Angela Diaz said she had threatened her. Angela Diaz was arrested, and Michelle said she didn't know who she was. This was strange. This could have been a mistake, or the two people could have met before. In the events that happened after Michelle was arrested, shocking truths about the two women came out. When you hear about these things, you can't help but wonder how far one lie can take you. She was born in Upland, California, on December 20, 1986. Michelle's folks ran a business, and she was their oldest daughter. She had a sister who is 3 years younger than her when they were growing up. Michelle grew up in a strict conservative home, and she and her parents were very close. She had a pretty normal life as a child. During school and college, she was known by her friends as a nice and friendly person. Michelle was also known for speaking her mind and being honest about what she thought. But if there were differences, she always found a way to make things right. Since she was a child, she has always worked hard and made sure to finish every job she was given. Interest in love. During high school, she was only in a relationship with one person, but we don't know his name or anything about him. We do know that they were together for a long time. They chose to get married in 2008. But Michelle didn't know that marriage wouldn't give her the happiness she was looking for. After 4 years of marriage, things began to go wrong. They broke up because things didn't feel like they did when they first started dating. This broke Michelle's heart. She thought that love was out of the question for her until she met Ian Diaz in 2013. We don't know much about his past, but we do know that Michelle is 9 years younger than him. It is said that they met on a dating site. At least for Michelle, things with Ian seemed like they were meant to be. Ian worked as an assistant U.S. Marshal, and Michelle worked at a marketing company. Ian seemed to care about her and love her a lot. These things about him attracted Michelle, and by the fall of 2014, they were living together. Then, Ian asked Michelle to marry him, and they set a date. The other way around. At the beginning of their marriage, Michelle and Ian seemed to get along very well, but despite how nice the relationship seemed on the outside, Ian slowly changed into someone Michelle never saw coming. Michelle has always thought of Ian as a kind and caring man, but as time went on, he soon started to hate himself and hurt other people. Michelle was surprised by this because she had trouble noticing these changes at first. She often noticed how he changed, but she saw them more as signs of love. He would sometimes ask her to wear clothes that showed more skin, But Michelle, who comes from a very traditional family, found this request very strange. Still, she did what Ian asked her to do. When Ian saw that Michelle was easy to convince, he started asking for more surprising things. Soon after, he asked her to get a hole in her belly button. At first, she wasn't sure, but then she said yes. At this point, Ian was pushing his luck. His wishes were getting even stranger. Ian had asked Michelle to quit her job at a marketing business she loved so she could work at Disneyland. Ian seemed to want to keep an eye on Michelle, so working at a place where he still had contacts was a good idea for him. When he told her about the idea, he said he wanted her to be safer, but all that meant was that he could keep an eye on her every move. Michelle thought this was a strange request at first, but she did it because she loved him and wanted to make her husband happy. By the time Michelle started to feel bad about the request, it was too late. She felt like she was changing into someone she wasn't, so she thought about talking to her husband about it. But instead of listening to her, he got angry and became violent. Michelle and Ian agreed to buy a condo together during this time of trouble. They were foolish to think that owning a place together would help their relationship. This happened in 2015, about 2 years after they first met. Michelle and Ian began looking for a house to buy, and they finally found one in downtown Anaheim. Even though it was a bit out of their price range, they still wanted it. But Michelle didn't know at the time that Ian had no plans to pay anything toward the debt. When it was time to put up the money, he made up an excuse that he was having trouble with money, but he promised to pay for the next month. Then Michelle chose to go ahead with the cash down payment. After going through all the papers, it seemed like things were in order. At the end of the summer of 2015, almost 2 months after buying the condo, Michelle chose to move back in with her parents. But she was still paying the mortgage, even though she had given a house. In fact, Ian kept not paying the mortgage, which made Michelle very angry. At this time, she had quit her high-paying job and was still working at Disneyland, which she hated. She was also making less money than she had been in the past. Instead of letting her anger get the best of her, she asked Ian in a nice way how much the condo mortgage payments were. But instead of answering, he just stopped answering her emails, phone calls, and texts. This was the last straw for Michelle. She chose to talk to him face to face. Then Ian said he had never planned to pay the mortgage. This made Michelle very angry. She didn't know what to do when she looked at the way things were. She sent Ian a rather harsh email, in which she told him that if he kept acting like that, things wouldn't look good for him. Ian was so angry about this email that he got a protection order against Michelle. But the cops never really helped him because he was also to blame. Michelle found out that Ian had asked for a restraining order and quickly told him that he had never paid the condo's payment. Since they bought it together, and it was in both of their names, they finally decided to hire property lawyers to settle the matter once and for all. When the decision was made, the judge took Michelle's side. Ian was told to pay off the rest of the debt, and if he didn't, he would have to pay a fine. Ian was upset by the decision, but he had no choice but to do what the court said. It took a whole year to figure out how to fix this mess. By 2016, they were no longer together. Michelle was free from this bad situation at last. New flame. Michelle was starting a new chapter in her life, but Ian was still very angry. He was still paying the payments and living in the condo. Ian was stressed out by the whole apartment thing. He started using dating apps again to try to put his life back together. This is how Ian met Angela Connell, the woman he thought was his best match. We don't know much about her, but we do know that she was born in 1985 and that she is from Phoenix, Arizona. Angela went to Catholic high school and then Arizona State University, where she got her degree in 2006. In January 2016, when Ian met Angela, they both felt a strong connection. Within a month, Ian asked Angela to move in with him, and she said yes. Angela and Ian seemed like they were meant to be together. In May 2016, Angela told everyone she was having twins. When Ian heard the news, he was very happy. Everything looked good for the soon-to-be parents until an unknown email started making trouble. The threat begins. Angela got a threatening text that said, "You're not the person Ian should be with." Angela was surprised by this message, and she thought it might have been from her boyfriend. Angela dated Jason Rayburn for a short time before she married Ian. But things didn't work out between them in the end. As soon as she got the unidentified message, she thought of him. But there was something that didn't seem right. When Angela and Jason broke up, she made sure to stop talking to him. So, he couldn't have known that she had a new boyfriend. Ian and Angela kept living in the apartment that Michelle had bought for them. When Ian talked to Angela about the house one day, she finally figured out that it might have been Michelle who sent that anonymous email. Angela soon started getting more emails from 6 different accounts. Each one had the same message but was written in a different way. She wanted to know who was sending these emails, so she answered one of them and asked who it was from. She was shocked to get a reply from someone who said her name was Michelle Hadley. Angela told her to stop getting in touch with her, but she kept sending her texts. The next few emails she got made her feel scared and like her life was in danger. Angela didn't want to take a chance after reading them, so she quickly filed a protection order against Michelle. On June 1, 2016, this took place. Angela said that the email she got from Michelle really made her feel scared and worried. She told the police officers that she was afraid to leave her house because Michelle's emails made her feel unsafe. She also said that she was afraid to leave her house because she was afraid of being attacked and killed. When the judge saw how serious the situation was, he or she gave Michelle the protection order right away. Michelle is arrested. It was June 2016, and Michelle seemed to have moved on from the bad relationship she had before. She went out to meet a friend sometime during the month and then went back home. But when she pulled into her yard, a group of police officers were there to meet her. Michelle was shocked, but she did what she was told and signed a protection order. She was then taken in to be questioned. During the questioning, Michelle was asked if she knew Angela and if she knew about her series of threatening emails. She responded that she had never heard of Angela and didn't know anything about the emails that the officers kept talking about. She even told the police officers that she was being set up because Google had told her a week earlier that her email address had been shut down. On the same day, she got a message from Microsoft saying that her main email was being used as the reset email for a bunch of other email addresses she had never made. That made her feel bad, but she made sure to call the Anaheim Police Department to tell them about it. She thought that maybe her ex-husband was trying to pretend to be her, but no one paid attention to her, no matter how hard she tried. On the other hand, the cops thought Michelle was just making things up. They didn't pay attention to what she said, so Michelle was given an order to stay away from her. But Michelle did not know that this was only the start. Threats keep coming. You might think that the situation was over when Michelle was given a protection order, but it wasn't. Not long after that, Angela started getting emails about a Craigslist ad she had never put up. There were details in these ads that encouraged a sexual coercion dream. Angela was shocked to find out that someone had started an account in her name, but it was strange that whoever it was knew everything about her. These information included her phone number, the full address of her condo, and even the type of dog she had. But besides Ian and Michelle, no one else would know the full address of the house. She didn't think that Ian could have done it. Angela got scared all over again when she thought about this idea. She didn't want to leave her house at all because whoever was after her knew where she lived. She always felt like she was being watched. She felt bad because she didn't know who could have done it. On June 24, 2016, which was a few days after the Craigslist ad, Angela called the cops. But this time, it wasn't because of the ad. Someone hurt her. Her clothes were torn and there were bruises on her neck. Her head had been hit against the wall as well. Angela still had the courage to call 911. The cops then asked Angela if she knew who had beaten her up. And then Angela said it was Michelle. The cops made sure to catch Michelle this time. They didn't think a protection order would stop her from hurting Angela. Michelle was put in jail. She was able to tell her folks that she was in jail while she was there. Since they came from a traditional family, they did everything they could to handle the situation. The bail amount for Shell was set at $10,000. And since her parents ran a successful business, they were able to help her right away. Angela started getting harassing texts again as soon as she moved out. Michelle couldn't have done it, right? Well, what was interesting was that Michelle's personal email address was used to send emails to Angela. Angela called 911. Again, not long after the terrible attack on her on July 13. This time, she did it because she saw a man standing outside her home. When the cops came and talked to the unknown person, the person said he was actually responding to the same sexually explicit Craigslist ad under the name Angela Diaz. The cops tried to find out where the account came from because they wanted to know who might have put up the ad. It led straight back to Michelle. Could Michelle have really lied to the cops about all of this, or was someone else using her name? The cops took Michelle into custody again the next day, on July 14. This time, they set her bail at $1 million. The amount was too much for her folks to pay. Michelle insisted that she did not send the emails or make the Craigslist ads. Michelle's parents believed her because they knew she wouldn't send threatening messages to anyone. Then Michelle's parents decided to hire a lawyer because they thought that whoever was playing this game could keep getting their daughter jailed. While Michelle was back in jail for the second time, the threats and letters to Angela stopped again. Angela's life seemed to be going well after 3 months. While this was going on, Michelle's parents did their best to figure out who the unknown person was who was pretending to be Michelle. To find out what was going on, they had to find out who could see her papers. They looked at information from schools, hospitals, and other places to see if there were any holes. This is where they found important proof. In June, Michelle was taken to the hospital, and the first texts were sent on the same day. Michelle could not have been the one who sent those texts. This bit of news gave Michelle's parents some hope. Michelle's dad also got a lot of software to keep track of the IP addresses of the emails being sent. Since the addresses were hidden, Michelle's parents got a surprise phone call one day telling them that Michelle was getting out of jail. Who would pay $1 million to get Michelle out of trouble? The twist in the story was that Ian was the one who helped Michelle get out of trouble. On September 30, 2016, Ian went to the cops and gave them $1 million bail to get Michelle out of jail. Michelle and her family couldn't believe how Ian got this much money. No one has said what that means. Why would he try to save her? Did he suddenly feel bad about the way he had treated her, or was there more to the story? Michelle and her family wanted to know the answers to these questions after Michelle was let out of jail. Then Ian surprised everyone by telling the truth. Ian said that Angela set Michelle up to look like the one who sent those dangerous emails. She had been sending herself dangerous emails through Michelle's name-based proxy email addresses. Angela went even further by putting up ads on Craigslist that people thought were made by Michelle. Only she and Ian could have known the information she put in those ads. Also, on June 24, 2016, when she was found bruised and bloody in her garage, Angela had done the damage to herself, and Ian had found CCTV video to prove it. Ian said that Angela had lied about more than just this one thing. She had a habit of making things up. Ian found out that Angela had been lying since the first day they met. She had even lied about being pregnant. Ian found proof that Angela had bought a sonogram of twins from Etsy for $7.50. She even bought a pregnancy test kit with a good result to back up her lie. But why would Angela want Michelle's life to be terrible? Well, it all began when Ian and Angela met in 2015. During that time, Ian talked a lot about Michelle and what happened at the house. This is when Angela became interested in Michelle and began looking into her past. Angela did this and found out that Michelle came from a good and rich family. When Angela heard this, she thought Michelle was a big win. Ian, who was married to Michelle, wanted to get back at them for the whole house thing. Ian was hurt by what happened at the house. After Michelle's countersuit, he was angry that he had to pay the debt. So they came up with a plan to get rid of Michelle. Ian gave Angela Michelle's email address, and the two of them planned to frame Michelle and get her arrested. Angela and Ian used different email names to talk to each other so that their evil plan wouldn't be found out. Then, they used VPNs to set up 6 different accounts in Michelle's name. Remember when Nicole told the police officers about Google alerts and the email addresses she never made? Well, it was always Angela. Angela wasn't happy when Michelle got an order to stay away from her because she wanted Michelle to leave for good. She thought of a way to take this to a whole new level at that point. She made a fake profile on Craigslist and used Michelle's name to make her first ad, in which she called men to her house for a sexual coercion fantasy. But the plan that the two of them made didn't make sense, so Ian told the truth about his wife and set her up in the process. He didn't seem to know how far she would go with things. Now that everything was out in the open, the cops got a warrant to look through all of Angela's devices. When they looked through Angela's things, they were shocked to find that Ian's claims were all true. They found 21 threatening emails, and most of them came from Angela and Ian's apartment. When the cops looked into where the other emails sent to Angela were sent from, they found that some of them were also sent from Arizona. When they looked into it more, they found out that Angela had gone to Arizona to see her father during that time. Investigators started looking into Angela's past after these shocking findings. This was when they found out that she had done something like this before. Angela did similar things in 2013 when she was dating Jason Rayburn, a California state trooper. During the time they were dating, Angela said she was a lawyer and had been told she had cervical cancer. But as time went on, Angela's condition and the way she worked didn't seem to make sense. This made Jason wonder, so he started looking into it. He soon found out, to his shock, that Angela had made up both her cancer and her job. Clearly, this was the end of Jason. Angela is taken into custody. On January 6, 2019, almost 3 years after the truth came out, Angela was taken into custody for her crimes. Michelle's record of causing a danger to life and assault was finally cleared 3 days after the Orange County District Attorney's Office worked to clear her name.
The most traumatic experience of my life, and I'm glad it's finally over.
Closure. Michelle is still reminded of the time she spent in jail and the wrong sentence. When she was arrested, she had to quit her MBA classes and lose her job. People close to her think it won't be hard for her to rebuild her image, and she hopes that it will grow from there. Michelle has been slowly getting back on her feet since she was cleared of all charges. She got her MBA and got a good job with a makeup company doing field marketing. Things got better for her after she went to New York to live with her sister. Ian, on the other hand, broke up with Angela and sold the house for $500,000 after they broke up. In 2021, He was charged with several crimes because he was said to have planned and carried out the plan to frame Michael. He was sentenced to 5 years in jail and was charged with lying under oath, cyberstalking, and plotting to cyberstalk. If the investigators and police officers had looked at the case more closely, it might not have gone as far as it did. How do you feel about this situation? What could Angela and Ian have been thinking when they came up with this plan? Do you think Michelle was shown to be right in the end? Tell us what you think about this in the area below. For more interesting real crime stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We're glad you watched it.